A few weeks ago, we did a podcast on the top 5 misconceptions that responders have about active shooter events. Today, the top 5 misconceptions the public has about how responders manage active shooter events. Coming up, stick around. Welcome to the Active Shooter Incident Management Podcast. My name is Bill Godfrey, your podcast host. I'm joined by 3 of the other C3 Pathways and SEER instructors. I've got Maertz sitting next to my left. Hello. And across the table from me, we've got Mark Rhame and Adam Pendley back in the house. Thank you all for coming back in.
Thank you.
So today we are going to talk about the top 5 misconceptions that the public has about how we as responders manage active shooter events. And so we surveyed a number of the instructors and had them kind of rank order list what they thought the top 5. So we're going to start off with number 5 and work our way up to the number 1 by the end of the thing. So the number 5 one is it takes too long to do reunification. Why does it take so long to get reunification done? Adam, you had personal experience with this.
I did. I was in charge of reunification on an incident that we ended up with 2 deceased, and then another, the suspect was deceased as well, and then anywhere from 9 to 11 on various types of injuries. And I, went to the scene, followed the plan, set up our reunification area, had an area set aside, and then discovered that everyone impacted by the incident was from out of town, which added a challenge to reunification. But what we discovered was getting information about those that were interviewed and getting information about those that were transported to the hospital was just working through the process and was relatively easy to get that information and get it to the right people. Unfortunately, with those that were deceased, it took a little bit longer. And from talking to investigators after the fact, I discovered that, in most homicide scenes, they work from the outside in. So they don't get to those that are deceased until they've processed a lot of evidence until they get to that point. And we may have an idea, witnesses and some other things, and that's what happened in our case. Witnesses may have an idea of who it was because they were involved in the original incident, but sometimes your local coroner or medical examiner's office or the investigators are reluctant to say a person's name as the deceased until they've been able to confirm it. So sometimes those that are going to get the worst news of their lives are the ones that end up waiting the longest. But even without those challenges notwithstanding, if you have others that are in lockdown within the site, let's say at a school or something along those lines, there's a lot of law enforcement work that has to be done to make sure that you're ready to clear the scene, to make sure that you can get those folks transported to an area where they can be reunified, and those processes take time.
So, Kami, let's talk about that a little bit because I know you do a lot of work with the schools up in your jurisdiction. Why does it take so long? The incident's over typically pretty quickly. I mean, 90% of the time these things are over in 10 minutes or less. Obviously, we have to get in and rescue the injured and get them transported. But, on a typical school campus of 1,000 kids plus or minus, why does it take hours before we can put them back with the parents?
Well, another thing to consider is even after the rescue, then there comes a clear, and that clear can take a really long time. When you're talking about a facility as large as the school, that could take hours just in itself of just making sure that they're, especially when you talk about school and small children and stuff, to make sure that everything is covered, that everybody's accounted for, and you don't want to overlook anything in that process. So you want to make sure that everything is systematically done. And so sometimes that in itself can take a long time. And then, like Adam mentioned, is that this is a crime scene. So once we're done with the initial process and the initial rescue and clear and everything in that, we have to slow everything down because now we have a crime scene. And so now we have to kind of switch hats into dealing with things on the investigation side, which is a whole nother element before everything can go into place and make sure that we are reuniting people with the right things or people and children and everything. And so all of that's a process that we have to make sure is done and done efficiently.
So, Mark, you spend a lot of time not only over your career in command, but also just in the training, working at the command post, working with the incident commander and the PIO. How would you coach them to either be prepared to answer some of these questions or to preempt some of these things about setting expectations for parents and guardians, friends, family about releasing the uninjured back to them, the accountability for where the injured have been transported, and ultimately if there has to be death notifications, fatalities. How would you coach them to be prepared for those questions and preempt them?
Well, reunification is a process, and it's not a simple process by any means. A lot of people would look at it from the outside and would go, well, you just put people back together again. It's not that simple, because we have to have accountability on the people that were involved in the incident, and making sure that, and using the example of schools, especially the little guys, that we put them back with the correct people. That is a serious issue. Obviously, we don't want to send them home with someone who has no custodial rights. But because it is a process, and because we're also looking at witness statements, once we start that whole process, and by the way, we can't use generally the people who are involved at that crime scene, that active shooter environment, as part of the process, except with some exceptions. Like, give you an example, a teacher in a room who survived the event, who brought the children into her or his room, secured it, should be taking a roll call, should be figuring out who's with them at that point in time. They still have a role in this, but for the most part, they have no role beyond that in the reunification process, because they were part of the crime scene. So we're going to have to bring people from the outside. Teams come in there and be part of this process. So it's going to take time to set it up, secure that environment where we're going to utilize to move people to, so we can put them back with their loved ones. And so from a management standpoint, we got to be prepared to tell the public and the parents, loved ones, custodials, that this is a good process. It's going to take some time. Our first priority is the people who are injured, and the fatalities, making sure those notifications are made. But after that, it is putting people back together the correct way, not the fastest way.
Mm-hmm.
Mark mentioned where we're going to put them back. How difficult is it from a law enforcement perspective when you're having to do an off-site reunification and you're having to move? And let's stick with schools as the example, because that's the one we typically worry about. You can have reunification in other instances, but schools is the one that we really worry about. How difficult is it from a law enforcement perspective to secure the facility where you're going to conduct reunification and then securely and safely move the kids? Walk us through that.
Sure. So, I mean, again, that's part of the process. That part takes time. And it kind of adds to the misconception, too, because parents are accustomed to coming to the school to pick up their child. So that's the first message that you have to get out, is the school is not accessible. We are going to have to move those people that have been impacted, the kids, to another area, and then we're going to start reunification there. So getting past that hurdle, you can't go to the school. We're going to tell you where to go, and just be patient. We'll get you the information as soon as we can. And then I would add to that, everyone's already been traumatized. We do not want to add to the trauma by making another mistake, by releasing someone who's been injured, or releasing somebody who needs to get their statement out, or releasing someone to the wrong custodial parent, or letting them be exposed to the media. A number of things that can happen if you don't do reunification in a controlled manner. That's the message that we have to get out to make sure that we understand this is going to take a little bit of time.
And Kami, when you've got a school campus and you're going to have to move the kids in the clearing phase, what's that process? What does that look like? Are the kids getting marched out with their hands on their head at gunpoint? When do they get searched? When do they get checked? Because that's always it's one of those shots that you see too often from the news helicopter camera of a line of people coming out, marched with their hands on their head. The cops are armed to the teeth. What should that look like in a perfect world, or what would you ask people to train to as a standard?
So what we would try to do, obviously, we have to think about safety on top of everything else. So we have to make sure that everybody is searched, and the dynamics of that, because we don't want to put somebody into a reunification building or anything that is armed or anything like that. And so sometimes it can look a little harsh when people are their hands they're visible and stuff like that, and searches are going to happen. Those searches would happen, though, within that first room. So we would not move them from that first location. That search and everything would happen there, and then they would go through a transportation process to whatever, typically buses would be called to the scene and stuff like that. And so prior to them ever being moved from that initial location, they would be searched and lined up and brought to that secondary location.
Gotcha. So from a incident commander's perspective, or the PIO perspective, the message up front needs to be, we're at a stable state.
Mm-hmm. All the threats been neutralized. Known threat.
There's no remaining known threats.
Yep.
We still have investigative work to do, and it's going to take us some time. We need to first account for those that have been injured. Do you feel like we need to specify injured and fatalities, or just say we need to account for those that have been injured?
I mean, I think at this point you can just say those that have been injured, and we need to make sure we're treating everyone else well also.
Yeah.
You know,
there's some safety things involved with the movement, and this is going to take a little bit of time. Our primary focus right now is trying to provide notifications as quickly as possible to the families of those that have been injured, and then be able to say to everybody else, we've already notified everybody who's got somebody injured. So if you have not received a notification from us, your child is safe, your kid is safe. And of course, a lot of times they're texting their parents anyways.
Absolutely.
They may well know that. Okay. Anything else on that topic before we move on?
The only thing I would say with that is to prior to an incident like this happening is to find a reunification spot. Don't wait for it to happen to find a spot that's going to be available and that's going to have the resources that you're going to need, especially for small children, bathrooms, a kitchen, all of those kind of things that you're going to need to consider beforehand to make sure that you can get there, traffic, all of those kind of things, a distance away from different locations, is to have those places already marked and ready to go for if that incident happened, then you already have those things set up.
Can I step on top of that one and say, not only you need one, you need two. Mm-hmm. Because that one that is your primary location, preferable one, may not be available. Mm-hmm. And the other problem is that we don't want to release that information, and that's one of the things that the public's going to go, why aren't you releasing that information now? Where's that reunification spot? We do not want to release that information until that location is secured, that we have all our pieces and parts there, our counselors, our law enforcement who's going to interview the witnesses, security in the building. All of that stuff needs to be in place before we have a single person show up, because if they show up ahead of time, we're probably going to be looking at our second reunification spot. Right. It's not going to be a usable place. And the problem is that they're going, well, you're keeping secrets. No, we're trying to get this done in a timely manner, and this is the way to do it most efficiently, is not to release the information until we're ready to do so.
Yeah, I think, you remind me of our dear friend who had this very thing happen to him. The information about where they were going to use for reunification leaked out of the command post very quickly. Mm-hmm. Their command post was too close to the outer perimeter, and media had a shotgun, my directional microphone pointed at their command post, and they heard the conversation. They announced it. Two parents, independent of each other, show up before the first law enforcement officer there. They get into an argument about God knows what. One of them brandishes a weapon and pops a round off, and that's it. And now this reunification site we were going to use is shot. And then they had a second one, and then that went south on them, and they ended up having to go to a third site in order to get the thing stood up. And all in, it just added hours to the confusion. Right. So, these are very real issues. As soon as you think you've got a site or two sites or even three sites, get some law enforcement over there and 100%. Get them secured, get them a presence there, because the likelihood that it's going to leak is higher than we would all like it to be.
And then just one last thing, if you're not doing so already, when you have those beginning of the school year and officers may be visiting the school to talk, or the school officials are talking about their plans, it needs to be reiterated with the parents at that time that if a bad thing happens, the reunification part of it will take time to get that message out early.
Yes. Absolutely. Yep. Okay, so that was number 5. Why is this reunification taking you guys so long? Number 4, body camera footage. We've got body camera footage showing the officers passing up or stepping over, sometimes literally stepping over injured and survivors. Why weren't they taking care of those survivors? Kami?
Well, our first priority on any incident like this is to eliminate the threat. To stop the dying, we have to stop that threat, and that's going to be our initial thing that we're pushing towards, or we're looking for that stimulus and we're moving towards that threat to eliminate that threat. And so sometimes that is stepping over people who need our help so that we can get back to them and get them in a safe environment where we can actually get rescue into them. So that's going to happen.
Certainly, because if we don't take care of the threat, they could create more injured for us. That's
And
not
they
doing.
will.
Yeah, they will. Mark, what would you say? Is it also not something we would want to say is, look, you're seeing one person, you're seeing the camera footage from one officer who had a specific job, and we had over 100 officers that all had different jobs, paramedics, firefighters, EMTs. There's a lot going on at the same time. How would you characterize that?
Well, I would tell the public that that first law enforcement officer, if they're following, the plan, hopefully this is what they're doing, is from a fire EMS perspective, we want them to give us counts. Tell us how many people are injured and what they believe their criticality is. And I don't mean to stop. If you still get a threat, they need to go toward that threat. They need to take out, neutralize that threat. But while they're doing it, they can get on the radio and say, I've got 5 down in the hallway. They all look critical. There's 2 down in room 1. Both of them look critical. From a fire EMS perspective, they are helping me get prepared. So on the outside of that building, we're standing up rescue task force based upon the numbers that they're telling me in my group, and I'm working with law enforcement to get prepared to go in there and start rescuing people as soon as they take down that threat. So it may look like they're bypassing and not doing anything for these people on the ground. And in fact, by passing on that information, they're saving us time, which is going to save those people that are on the ground.
And Adam, I was going to ask you, you've had to serve as PIO in a plethora of incidents. How would you, if you knew you've got body cam footage that's going to be released, whether it's being released today, being released tomorrow, would you preempt it? Would you kind of talk about that at a press conference before the footage is released to kind of set the stage for it? How would you address it?
Sure, absolutely. And I think you preface it with this is a traumatic and dynamic event where the officers were following their training, and you will see times on the body camera footage when they're having to take actions that are directed towards the threat, while others may come in behind and are focusing on treating the injured, which even treating the injured can sometimes be a very rough business, right? I mean, many of your viewers will have never seen this type of incident before, thank goodness. But even the action of applying a tourniquet can look very traumatic, but it is life-saving.
Sure.
And those that have been injured
and potentially painful.
Right, very painful. And those that have been injured and traumatized, they're in shock, and you're having to give them loud commands. Even though they're an innocent injured person, you're having to give them loud commands to make sure that you can take those life-saving actions. So you're going to see a lot of things on the body camera footage that are not like visiting your local doctor's office. These are life-saving actions after a traumatic injury.
Hey, Bill, I'd say one other thing in regard to the incident commander, the PIO, in regard to body cam footage, is that unfortunately, especially social media, they want to cherry pick the information. And I think from an incident command standpoint, especially after the fact, maybe hours later, when you're getting ready to release that information, maybe days later or weeks later, whatever it happens to be, when you're getting ready to release that body cam footage, is that make sure the public knows that we're releasing the entire body cam footage. And there may be people out there going to cherry pick this to their own needs or mission or whatever it happens to be. So if you want to see the entire picture, look at what we're releasing, not just that little snippet that someone put on their social media site.
So to that end, Kami, Adam, you are both law enforcement leadership positions. Do you also release the body cam footage of officers that were either directly involved in patient care or may have been the security detail on a rescue task force that has clear footage showing injured being cared for? Would you release that too? Would you blur out some of it? Would you cut some of it? How would you address that?
I think that's going to have to be, that wouldn't be something obviously that would initially be released or anything like that. It would have to be through a process. There's different things with sunshine law and everything else that we would have to take into consideration, and privacy and, really with our public records and stuff like that, that would have to be gone through and made sure all those laws are being followed.
Right. And we've said this before, is that even though the public has a right to know, some of the stuff that's being filmed is the worst days of their lives, of somebody else's life, right? So in that patient privacy and laws differ from state to state on when and how that information can be released. But again, making sure that everyone understands that there's certainly more than one perspective, and those things that can be released, release it from all angles. So there's no misunderstanding of what can be seen.
I think from my perspective, there's no getting around body cam footage. There's also, on any of these responses, very likely going to be some body cam footage of somebody that's doing something that we just, we're like, oh, why did that person do this? Or they looked lost, or they're back and forth, or, they're getting stuck behind a locked door. It's the silly little things. I say silly, that's the wrong word. It's the little things that happen. And Mark, to your point, about the cherry picking, it's the little things that happen and that's going to be out there. To me, I think one of the best defenses on this stuff is to be on the offense and preempt it. And if you're going to be releasing body cam footage in 3 days or 4 days, to say, we are going to release some of the body cam footage. It is going to take a few days to go through it. What we will be releasing first will be some key elements of these things. However, we're not going to release body cam footage showing specific civilians that were injured or people that were injured. We may or may not release the entire time of some of these things, and begin to set the stage for why some of those things are.
Sure.
Now, the conspiracy nuts, they're
can't do anything about it.
Yeah.
You can't do anything about it, and they're going to go conspiracy on you no matter what. So to me, I think that's one of the best things to do, is just to get ahead of it, not in an hour before you release it, or not as you're releasing it, but set it in stage and re-hit the point for a couple of days. So that's one of the things, we're awaiting this body cam footage that they're telling us is going to show this, this, and this. So any other things on body cam footage before we move on? All right, so number 5 is, why does reunification take so long? Number 4, your body cam footage shows your people stepping over injured and survivors and not taking care of them. The number 3, which goes right to what we were just talking about, law enforcement is just trying to cover up, insert blank here, and won't release the information. This is one we hear about a lot. Why is it so hard for law enforcement to just tell the truth? I'm sorry. I mean, to release the information.
I think that's always one of the biggest misconceptions, is that if we cannot answer something immediately, that we are hiding something or being evasive. And this is an investigation, and so things have to be released in order. And we also don't want to release anything unless we're 100% sure that that is the truth and that what we're putting out is factual information. These are people's lives. It's our community. This is very important information, and you don't want to get it wrong. So you want to take that time to make sure that everything's been vetted, everybody's aware, and that we're also have one message between all the different entities that are there prior to us putting out that information. And so it may create a delay, but even as the public, you want to remember that you want the right information. You don't want to be given wrong information and then it come back. And so it's not that law enforcement's lying, but it's, a process.
Now, when you say the wrong information, we're talking about moving targets on the number of injured. Where you said we had 12, it turns out you had 18. You said you only had 2 fatalities. Now there's a third fatality or a fourth fatality. Is that what we're talking about?
Sure. Absolutely.
Any of those type of details are potential suspect information.
Yes.
Oftentimes the media, through social media, will uncover some information about a potential suspect or motive that law enforcement is not in a position to confirm yet. One, because it may sour the investigation, or it may not be fully vetted yet. So the level of confidence in information that law enforcement has to have is different than what early speculations might be from either the public or the media looking at certain things. And so I think the 2 biggest tools in the toolbox are to be honest. So we will tell the truth, Bill, to say either we do not have that information at this time, or we have it, but we're not releasing it at this time. And I think that's better than saying, well, I can't answer that, right? You give them the reason why you can't answer it. Either you don't know, or the investigation's ongoing, or we have that information, we're just not releasing it at this time.
I think the other one I would say is we're not ready to discuss that.
Right, exactly.
It's too premature for us to discuss that, or we're not prepared to discuss that at this point.
Right.
I think those are all really
And Bill,
good
one
things.
last one is that when they insist or want the names of the people who are involved, frankly, in my eyes, the family's more important than the public in regard to getting that information. We have to notify family members of injuries and fatalities before we put it out there in the public's eye, and the public can wait. The families are so much more important.
Absolutely.
Completely agreed. And we all know of the one notorious case that all makes us angry every time we talk about it, of one of the national news entities having a reporter that went to the hospital and pretended to be a family member to try to gain bedside access of a child, of a person under the age of 18 that had been injured of this. And so we do, I think as responders, have a duty to protect them. And maybe that's, I had somebody I worked with a long time ago. I'll never forget this. It didn't have anything to do with active shooter event, but it was one of those things where you get the phone call and they go, okay, I'm getting asked questions about this topic. And you go, oh God, here we go. What are we going to have to do to clean this up and play the defensive? And they said something, they said, sometimes you don't want to be on the defensive. You want to lean into it and step forward and go, you're damn right. That's what we did. And here's why, because it doesn't necessarily leave them anywhere to go. And to say that, maybe one of the tools in the toolbook in the toolbox for the incident commander or the PIO is when they start getting accused of, you're not releasing the information, you're not telling us anything about the injured or the hospitals. And you go, you damn right we're not. Because our job right now is to protect those people that have been injured and their families. And they're our focus, not the public. When the time is right, we'll release that information. But right now, our job is to protect those that have been harmed.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Anything else on that topic? All right. So number 5, why does reunification take so long? Number 4, the body camera footage is showing you stepping over people. Number 3, law enforcement's just trying to cover it up. Number 2, why did they stop and take the time to put on fill-in-the-blank gear, body armor, extra go bag, extra ammo, long gun? Why did they stop and take the time? It's because they were afraid, and they should have been running right inside to take care of business.
Oh, so that one is very interesting in the sense that there are times when a law enforcement officer might have to face a solo entry situation that is thrust upon them because they're in the right place at the right time to try to make a difference. But if there are an extra few seconds that those officers are responding to a dispatch call that is violent and dynamic, that equipment is made for a reason. And not only does it protect the officer, and it is in no way is the police officer trying to put their own safety above the safety of the public. We know that the priority of life is innocence, then law enforcement, and on so on from there. It's about being able to stay in the fight longer. If they're facing a dynamic, violent situation, having the additional equipment that is issued for that purpose keeps them in the fight longer, allows them to bring a resolution to a very dangerous situation and save lives.
Absolutely. And there is gear, when we think about law enforcement officers, there's different roles in law enforcement. Some are detectives, some are street patrol, some are SWAT. There's different levels of protection that we carry with us that we may not be wearing day to day, and different levels of protection that we may be wearing, or carrying different types of guns that are going to be more efficient in those types of scenarios that we're not necessarily going to have on our body, that we do have to stop and get out of locked containers, or, those kind of situations that we have to prepare for before we go into a scene so we can stay on the scene longer and fight. Now,
Mark, you and I are both on the fire service side of this, and so this is a pretty easy one for us because we've dealt with it for years. But what are your thoughts on the officers stopping before they get to the scene, stopping somewhere away from the scene to gear up? Because there's been a number of incidents where officers arriving on the scene were immediately under attack, in some cases before they got out of the car, for some cases before the car was in park. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, statistically, and most people in the public don't know this, and obviously most responders probably don't know it either. Statistically, law enforcement officers are getting shot on the outside of the building more than they are on the inside. So the public may be in this perception that, well, they're safe until they get inside. That's where they're going to see the threat. No, in fact, when they pull up to the scene and they're getting, exiting their vehicle and they're making their approach to that structure, wherever it happens to be, that's when they're in the most danger statistically. So why wouldn't we put them in a position to protect themselves, but also to stay in the fight, as Adam said? They should be prepared. But again, who would expect an officer to ride around with all that gear on all the time? That makes no sense whatsoever. So I would think that what makes perfect sense is if they're a block away, they stop real quick, they throw their gear on, they get back in their vehicle, get up to that scene. By the time they do that, probably their team is already getting there at the same time, and they can assemble a team approach into that environment. So I think it's perfectly defendable. As management, you got to take that point. No, I would need my person to be protected, be safe, but also to stay in the fight. We don't want anyone to get shot, but I especially don't want my officers to get shot as they exit their vehicle. That just doesn't make any sense.
Well, Bill, I'm going to turn the tables on you a little bit. What about fire folks? We know, I think you started to mention it, that clearly you have to put on certain turnout gear before you approach a burning building.
With it all.
Yeah.
I know.
It looks cool.
Yeah.
It looks cool, right?
But,
yes, it does.
So, the public has a perception that that's acceptable and has to happen. But second to that, what about equipment? I know we have mixed feelings about this, but what about a ballistic vest for for EMS folks?
Well, let's take one thing at a time. So
Sure.
I think I think all have heard me say this in classes. I think the idea of law enforcement officers taking 30 seconds, 60 seconds to get gear, whether that's heavier body armor, long gun, go bag,
Stop the bleed
extra
kits.
ammunition,
Absolutely.
whatever the case may be, is the most defensible thing ever to shut down, provided that your PIO or your incident commander has anticipated the question, knows the answer, because it's this simple. It's this simple. So the firefighters went to the grocery store to get groceries, and because we're going to make dinner.
Of course.
And while you're out at the grocery store, you get dispatched to a structure fire, and you roll up, and you didn't have your gear on because you were riding to the grocery store. So you roll up and you got no gear on, and it's the classic. Mom's out in the front yard, my baby, and the house is ripping in flames. Well, we wouldn't take the time to put our gear on. We would go rushing right in. And everybody that's a firefighter looks at you like, what are you, brain dead?
Yeah.
No,
Right.
We're going to put our gear on. We're going to put our air packs on because that is necessary for us to stay in that fight and conduct the rescue and save the life. Absent that gear, we can't be effective in saving lives. And it's the same thing for law enforcement. So
Yes.
to me, and Adam, I think this is where you were going, while it's not apples to apples, it is. And it's metaphorically the same thing. And so if a PIO or an incident commander has anticipated that question and has that prepared as an answer, I think the public generally gets, firefighters, we see them, they're normally in uniform, but when they're fighting a fire, they got all these heavy coats and
Absolutely.
pants on and the helmets and these big air packs, they can kind of generically get it. And I think that's really important. Now, in the case of body armor, I'm fully supportive of body armor for fire and EMS. Absolutely. Where I caution people is the ones that would sometimes take the notion that, well, my department didn't issue me body armor, so I'm not going inside. That I got an issue with.
Right.
That's a different problem
Right.
with a different solution.
That is, yeah.
But on game day, we've got a game to play.
Sure.
So to me, this is one of the most defensible things. But we all watched this play out at a really notorious event. The event didn't go so well. There was video of an officer in their trunk. Granted, it was not 30 seconds. It was
Yes.
a couple of minutes. But when the officer came out of the trunk, they had on every heavier body armor. They had a long gun. They had another bag, presumably was a go bag of some type, whatever. It was an explainable thing. But the organization had already taken so much backlash that they shut down.
Yes.
And the news, in absence of anything else, ran with the coward story.
Right.
And it should have never happened.
Absolutely.
No.
Should have never happened. Okay. Anything else we want to put on that one? All right. So number 5, why does reunification take so long? Number 4, body camera footage of people stepping over the injured or survivors. Number 3, law enforcement trying to cover things up because they won't tell us what's going on. Number 2, putting gear on prior to going in. And the number 1, that area where all the vehicles are parked and the people standing around, aka staging, is for the lazy and scared.
Right. Oh, again, this is one that needs to be talked about in advance. You know, understanding if you do invite media to your training and other events and whatnot, having them understand that, hey, those initial responding officers are going to go in and deal with the threat and begin rescue, and so are the initial fire and EMS folks. But there are so many other jobs that have to get done. One of the early ones we just talked about was reunification. We're going to need a number of law enforcement, fire, and EMS folks to run an effective reunification area. We're going to have security on perimeters, and those jobs aren't all known right at the very minute that you're first there. We know that in those first few minutes, we have a lot of officers going inside to address the threat. And then after that, if we don't control the follow-on resources, then we end up with chaos and no other jobs get done. And so just the long list of other very important jobs that not only contribute to saving lives, but contribute to containing the scene, getting information to family members, preventing additional threats from going off, all of those sort of things.
I would say that most people can visualize or remember a picture, maybe it was on the media, that showed this massive amount of public safety response to this particular scene and people sort of running in that direction. Do you see one cop standing there going, I need 3 more officers over here, maybe holding a sign up, 3 more officers to get, well, no, that doesn't happen.
Like a ticket scalper.
Yeah.
Looking for 3, I got 3, I need 3.
But no, what staging is not about slowing down. It's about it getting organized and prepared and getting ready to respond in an organized fashion. So when we stand up staging, it's about building those teams out, as Adam said. We don't expect people to rush to a scene and all of a sudden everybody just goes to the big tree and starts building out teams. It doesn't work that way. So staging allows us to create that environment. Being said, management, especially in the press briefing, should be ahead of the curve. They should be up there and saying, these crews did an amazing job. They did exactly what we said. Staging is part of our practice and policies and training, and they did exactly what we told them to do, and they got organized, and this was a timely response that took down the threat and rescued the people that need to be rescued.
I think that's the best thing, and I think both of you hit on it. Is it's perception, and so it's getting ahead of that and letting the public know the perception of it is that people aren't just sitting there, is that people have jobs to do, and that everybody has a task, and that making sure that people are going down range or going to the hospitals or going to a different location for reunification, that everybody has a task and a job to do, and that staging is where we're holding people so that it's not that mass chaos, so that we don't see the overconvergence on the scene where ambulances can't get in and out, and managing all of those resources effectively to make sure that the mission can get accomplished.
I think that's the key. Is staging is where we give teams a task and purpose. It's where we take people, individual singular resources, we organize them as a team, and then we assign them a task and purpose. And I think from my perspective, whether it's the PIO or the incident commander, you stand up and say, look, we need every gun exactly where we need it, when we need it, doing what we need it to do. That doesn't magically happen. And if everybody floods into the scene, we have a bigger problem. We have bigger confusion, and we're not getting those tasks done. The other challenge that we have, if that's left under control, you have 50, 60, 100 police officers running around with their guns out and their adrenaline up. The chances that they can shoot each other or shoot an innocent because they came around a corner and face to face with somebody they didn't expect, we train to avoid that. But if everybody's running around uncontrolled, the possibility, the probability of that rises. So we need every gun where we need it, when we need it, doing what we need it to do. We need every EMT, paramedic, ambulance doing what we need done, when we need it done, where we need it done. And I, as an incident commander, I want more resources than I'm actually going to need.
Absolutely.
The problem is I don't know how many resources I need for about 30 to 60 minutes.
Right.
And so in the meantime, I want them all. But I don't want them in my scene messing things up. I want them waiting for me to give them a task and a purpose. And then I want them moving quickly. with that task and purpose to go get the job done.
Absolutely.
Yep. And that brings up a good point too, is because you do have so many different entities coming from so many different locations, is that it gives them a location to go to. Is that staging gives them a common place that this is where I'm heading. And so even if they're on the way there and you're going to re-divert them to somewhere else, they have a common place of where they're going. And sometimes in any type of scene, that's really important to just give them an area.
I think that's right on target.
Absolutely. Anything
Anything else on this one? Nope. All right. It's funny. We spent more time talking about the number 5 one than we did talking about the number 1. But honestly, I think it's the top 3 of these, or at least the top 2, the putting gear on prior to arrival and the staging, are things that to someone who doesn't understand our business look bad, but quite honestly are very easy to explain if the PIO has prepped their incident commander during the before the press conference. Hey, something you might anticipate is somebody may ask about this, or they may ask about that.
Right.
Or we're seeing these things trend on social media, so I want you to address this, or I want to address that.
Right.
So,
and my final thought on that is exactly what Mark said, is that if you're prepared to say, hey, no, they did exactly what they were trained to do, and we needed them there because we needed them for this, this, and this.
yeah.
Yes.
And I think the other thing, we talked about this in another podcast, I think it was a few weeks ago. We also want some resources that are standing by as a quick reaction force.
Yes.
In case there's something that happens adjacent to this that we weren't expecting. We're not sitting there with no resources. We've got teams that are geared up, ready to roll, ready to roll. And I'm going to wrap us up with this thought that I really like. It's a saying from all of the tactical folks, the SWAT guys and gals, who I affectionately call the Hut Hut boys, in homage to the Blues Brothers. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast.
Absolutely.
And if that's good enough for the SWAT guys and gals, then it damn sure is good enough for us. Slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Thank you very much for coming in. It's been a pleasure to get through this one. Top 5 misconceptions that the public has about managing active shooter events. If you have not liked or subscribed to the podcast, please do so, and please share it with the people that you work with. This doesn't really do us any good if we don't get the word out as we go. I want to say thank you to our producer, Carla Torres, for running things behind the scene and making it look great. And until next time, stay safe.
Thanks.